Good evening and welcome back, dear listener. Tonight, let us drift slowly into the quiet streets of ancient Rome. Picture the stillness of a city lit by flickering oil lamps, the gentle rhythm of footsteps on stone pavements, the murmur of neighbors exchanging words across narrow courtyards, and the soothing trickle of water flowing from fountains. It is a calming scene, one that feels distant yet strangely familiar. Many wonder about the lives of those who walked those streets long ago. Did they truly enjoy the marvel of indoor plumbing? Tonight, we will wander gently through that question together, step by step, as though taking a slow evening stroll through history's twilight. Before we begin, let me ask you softly, how are you tonight? Perhaps you are resting after a long day, or maybe it is late in your part of the world and your eyes are already heavy. From which country are you listening, and what time is it where you are right now? Wherever you may be, it feels comforting to imagine all of us connected in this shared moment of stillness. If you enjoy calm journeys into the past, you may gently tap like, subscribe, and even turn on the little bell, so you will not miss the next quiet story when it arrives. Let us now ease into our tale. To speak of Roman plumbing is to speak of water, for water was at the very heart of the city's life. It flowed, it nourished, it cleaned, and it refreshed. Yet, beyond its physical uses, water carried a quiet message. Rome was not only a city of people, but also of engineering, planning, and ambition. For the Romans, having control over water was proof that their society had achieved something extraordinary. And tonight, we will look closely at how they managed to bring water into their homes and lives. The first step in understanding Roman plumbing lies in their aqueducts. These long channels, built of stone and brick, stretched across valleys and hills, often supported by graceful arches that still stand in ruins today. Imagine water beginning its journey high in the mountains, then quietly winding down toward the city, carried on a path designed by human hands but enabled only through the will of the Creator who placed those springs upon the earth. Without those natural sources, no amount of stonework could have brought Rome to life. As the aqueducts entered the city, they brought not just water, but also opportunity. Neighborhood fountains sprang to life, their steady trickles filling basins where families came with clay jars and wooden buckets. The sound of running water, constant and calm, became part of the daily rhythm of life. At dawn, women and children might gather at the fountains, while in the quiet evenings, neighbors exchanged greetings as they filled their vessels. The water itself was a blessing, but the meeting places it created gave communities their heartbeat. Yet, you may wonder, what of the homes themselves? Could Romans turn a tap and have water flow into their kitchens or courtyards? In truth, for most, the answer was no. The ordinary family relied on the fountains and wells, fetching water each day as part of life's steady rhythm. But among the wealthy, there was something rare and remarkable: pipes, sometimes made of lead or clay, that carried water from the aqueducts directly into private villas. These homes might boast small fountains or basins, their gentle sounds echoing in shaded courtyards, bringing comfort to their residents. Still, even here, water's presence was not a given. Its flow depended on the larger system, and its quality varied. What is striking is not only that Rome managed to build such a network, but that it attempted to bring its benefits into private spaces at all. It shows us a society that dreamed of comfort and convenience, though the reality was unevenly shared. The marvel of Roman plumbing extended beyond homes to the famous bathhouses. These grand buildings, often the pride of a district, relied on the careful balance of hot and cold water carried by pipes and stored in cisterns. Floors were heated, steam rooms filled with mist, and basins overflowed with clear water. For many, this was where plumbing became real, not in their modest dwellings, but in these public spaces where water was managed, directed, and enjoyed. The baths were more than places of washing. They were woven into daily life. People gathered not only to clean themselves, but to meet others, to rest, and to share news. Imagine the calm hum of voices, the soft splash of water, and the gentle warmth that filled the air. Though these buildings belonged to a different time, their rhythm feels timeless, reminding us that human beings have long sought both cleanliness and connection, and yet we should pause to remember the limits of these systems. Plumbing, whether in homes or public spaces, was not universal. Many families still carried water by hand, and sanitation was basic compared to what we know today. What Rome achieved was remarkable, but it was not perfection. Even so, the effort to guide water, to tame it and make it useful, left behind echoes that we can still trace in stone and memory. One of the most fascinating aspects of Roman plumbing was their approach to sanitation. The Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer of Rome, carried away waste and rainwater, keeping the city more livable than it otherwise might have been. Imagine the underground tunnels, dark and silent, with water moving steadily through them. Though the system was far from perfect, it represented an early step toward managing the needs of a vast and growing population. Public latrines were another example. These were shared spaces, often long stone benches with flowing water beneath. People would sit side by side with little privacy in a setting that to us feels unusual but to them was ordinary. The water carried waste away, reducing the risks of disease. It was a simple system, but it worked, and it shows us how Romans used running water not only for comfort, but also for public health. Even so, daily life for most Romans still involved effort. Carrying water from fountains, waiting in lines, and managing resources carefully were all part of the routine. Plumbing may have touched parts of the city, but it was not everywhere. For the majority of people, water remained something to be collected, measured, and cherished. This balance between innovation and limitation gives us a clearer picture of Rome not as a perfect paradise, but as a society always striving to improve. The wealthiest households, however, could afford more. Some had elaborate piping systems that supplied courtyards with decorative fountains, or even private bathing areas. These luxuries were rare, but they reveal how plumbing was also a mark of social status. To have water flowing into your home was to show not only convenience, but also prestige. It was a symbol of comfort and of connection to the mighty infrastructure of the city itself. Yet water, like so much else, reminded Romans of their dependence on larger forces. Springs might dry, aqueducts could fail, and pipes sometimes broke. The engineering was extraordinary, but it was not eternal. In those moments, even the wealthiest citizen returned to the same fountains used by their neighbors. The sound of water filling clay jars echoed the truth that all people, rich or poor, needed the same basic gift of life. As centuries passed, many of Rome's systems fell into disrepair. Without the same level of maintenance, aqueducts cracked, baths closed, and fountains dried. The once constant sound of flowing water faded in some places, leaving only silence and memory. Yet the ruins still stood, their arches casting long shadows across the land, reminding later generations of what had once been possible. In time, builders and thinkers would look back at Rome's aqueducts and sewers, drawing inspiration from them. Medieval towns, Renaissance cities, and even modern engineers studied the remains, marveling at the precision of the old stonework. Rome's achievements, though imperfect, left an enduring lesson that water could be guided, shared, and used to sustain the life of an entire city. And so, when we ask if Romans really had indoor plumbing, the answer is both simple and complex. Yes, in certain homes, water flowed through pipes into courtyards and basins. Yes, in public baths and latrines, plumbing shaped daily routines. But for most, the system was outside their doors, waiting at fountains and wells. It was advanced for its time, but not yet the private convenience we take for granted today. Still, the quiet sound of Roman fountains, the steady flow of aqueducts, and the hum of bathhouses all remind us of a city alive with water. It was not only a technical achievement, but a rhythm of life that shaped how Romans lived, worked, and rested. The memory of that rhythm lingers even now, like the echo of footsteps on stone streets long since abandoned. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine that calm flow of water in the distance. Picture yourself walking through a Roman courtyard, hearing the gentle trickle of a fountain, and feeling the cool air of evening settle around you. Let the story of Rome's water guide you into rest, carrying you softly toward sleep, where the past becomes a gentle dream. Water, in ancient Rome, was not simply a practical necessity. It carried a deeper meaning, a quiet presence that gave structure to life. To the Romans, water symbolized order, stability, and the success of their city. Where water flowed, life could flourish. Where fountains bubbled, people gathered. And in the gentle sound of streams and channels, Romans found reassurance that their city was strong and cared for. When fresh water was guided into the city, it felt like more than just an achievement of engineering. It was a sign that human skill, through the will of the Almighty, had made something extraordinary possible. Nature provided the springs, the hills, and the rivers. The Romans, with stone and vision, extended that gift, carrying it over vast distances. Without water, the city could not have survived. With it, Rome thrived and grew beyond measure. The arrival of water shaped not only the city's function, but also its identity. Imagine walking through Rome and hearing fountains pouring steadily into carved basins, the sound mingling with voices in the streets. The water seemed to give rhythm to the city, its flow marking the passing of time just as clearly as footsteps or bells. It was part of the background, unnoticed by some, but vital to all. Aqueducts, fountains, and basins gave people access to something that, in other places and times, remained scarce. In Rome, water was shared, carried across neighborhoods, and distributed with intention. It did not belong to a single household or family. It was meant for the many. This sense of common benefit set Rome apart, and it is one of the reasons the city could sustain its vast population. Water also brought dignity to daily routines. To fill a jar at a fountain was not only to complete a task, but to participate in a rhythm of community. The clear trickle became a comfort, a familiar sound at dawn, in the heat of the day, or in the quiet of evening. Even those who lived with little could rely on the presence of water, steady and free, flowing into their neighborhoods without end. At the same time, water offered rest to the weary. A shaded fountain might cool the air, and the sight of rippling water could ease the mind. Children played near fountains, their laughter blending with the sound of streams. Travelers refreshed themselves, washing dust from their hands and faces. For all, rich or poor, the fountains gave a gentle reminder that life was being sustained in ways both visible and unseen. The fountains themselves became landmarks, places of orientation in the city's maze of streets. People met there, waited there, and spoke there. The water tied them together, as much a social bond as a physical one. Its presence in so many corners of the city turned ordinary errands into shared experiences. Without words, the water created connection. Even in the great forums and public squares, fountains were more than decoration. They were functional, providing relief for the crowds that gathered for markets, assemblies, or festivals. The sound of flowing water softened the noise of voices and footsteps, offering balance amid the bustle. It was as though the city breathed more calmly because water was always there, whispering in the background. The Romans may not have spoken of water as we do today, but their actions reveal how much they valued it. They built not only with strength, but with care, ensuring that water could reach far corners of their settlements. In doing so, they preserved a sense of stability in a world that was often unpredictable. The presence of water meant safety, health, and the possibility of growth. Thus, in Rome, water was never just water. It was a gift, flowing through stone channels and pouring from carved mouths into open basins. A gift made possible by the Creator who placed springs in the earth, and by the hands of engineers who guided that flow. And, as Romans listened to its quiet song, they lived with a sense of continuity, knowing that as long as water reached their city, life would go on. The reach of water in Rome was not only practical but also symbolic. Aqueducts carried it across valleys and hills, silent proof of a city's ambition. Each arch of stone was a promise, a reminder that life in Rome was supported by careful planning and constant flow. Even centuries later, the sight of these ruins inspires quiet wonder, as though the water itself still lingers in memory. In the crowded neighborhoods of Rome, the gift of water made daily life possible. Without fountains, families would have struggled to cook, to clean, or to simply endure the heat of summer. The steady presence of water gave balance, reminding everyone that while the city was busy, there was also relief. It was a rhythm as essential as the rising and setting of the sun. Farmers who lived beyond the city also felt its influence. Water was guided not only into fountains, but into fields and gardens. Crops grew, orchards thrived, and livestock survived because water was carefully managed. The same systems that nourished the city also sustained the land around it, creating a cycle of dependence between town and countryside. The Romans saw water as a resource to be preserved and directed. They built cisterns to store it, channels to divert it, and reservoirs to protect it during dry seasons. The thought and labor behind these systems show us how carefully water was valued. It was never taken for granted, but always seen as something worth guarding. In moments of peace, water gave joy. Imagine the calm of a shaded courtyard, with a small fountain trickling into a stone basin, the air cooled by its presence. For families who had access to such luxuries, the sound of water was a comfort, a reminder of stability. It soothed the mind and offered a sense of peace, like a soft lullaby that never ended. In moments of hardship, water was survival itself. Whether carried in buckets from fountains or stored in jars within modest homes, it was the one resource no one could live without. The Creator provided it through springs and rivers, and the Romans did their best to honor that gift by guiding it where people needed it most. The idea that water could belong to everyone, flowing through public fountains without charge, feels striking even now. It made life in a great city possible for thousands of families. No matter one's wealth, the sound of running water could be heard in the streets. reminding all of their shared reliance on the same source of life. The aqueducts and fountains, though silent today, once carried not only water but also a sense of community. They whispered through the city like threads of connection, binding neighbors together, sustaining the markets, and calming the restless nights. Their flow was not loud or boastful, but steady, dependable, and endlessly reassuring. Looking back, we can see that water in Rome was more than engineering, more than stone and pipes. It was the quiet foundation on which daily life rested. Its constant presence shaped the way people lived, worked, and gathered. And its memory still lingers, echoing in the ruins left behind. And so, as we leave this part of the story, let the gentle sound of Roman water stay with you. If you have enjoyed this calm journey, you may softly subscribe to join us again for future stories. In the next tale, we will step into another chapter of the past and explore what was life like in a Tudor castle. A quiet glimpse into halls of stone, where life was both grand and ordinary, waiting for us to discover. When we speak of Roman plumbing, the aqueducts are always at the heart of the story. They were the grand channels that carried water into the city, sometimes from tens of miles away. Imagine looking across the countryside and seeing long lines of arches, each one supporting the flow of water, steady and unbroken. These structures were not loud or flashy. They simply did their work, day after day, bringing life into the heart of Rome. The aqueducts began with springs high in the hills or mountains. Engineers studied the land carefully, tracing paths where gravity could do the work. Then, stone by stone, they built channels that sloped ever so gently, guiding water across valleys and ridges. The precision was remarkable. Too steep, and the water rushed away. Too flat, and it stagnated. The balance had to be exact, and the Romans mastered it with patience and care. At times, the aqueducts disappeared into tunnels carved through hillsides. At other times, they soared above valleys on rows of arches. To those who lived in their shadow, they must have seemed both practical and awe-inspiring. Even today, the ruins that remain stand tall against the horizon, silent reminders of the water that once flowed through them. Water moved constantly through these channels, protected by stone covers to keep it clean. Along the way, small reservoirs and distribution tanks helped slow the flow, collect sediment, and send the water in different directions. It was not a single stream, but a carefully managed system that branched like the veins of a living body, reaching into every corner of the city. As the aqueducts entered Rome, they poured water into large cisterns. From there, it was directed to fountains, baths, and even some private homes. The system was both centralized and shared, making sure that the entire city had access. The water was not locked away, but made to serve the needs of many. In this way, the aqueducts were more than engineering, they were acts of public service. The construction of aqueducts required more than labor. It required vision. To build something that stretched for miles, often across difficult landscapes, demanded planning that could span generations. Workers cut stone, mixed mortar, and shaped arches, not for their own benefit alone, but for a city that would endure long after them. The aqueducts were monuments, not only to Rome's present, but also to its future. For ordinary Romans, the aqueducts may not have been something they thought about daily. They were simply part of life, like the air or the ground beneath their feet. But in truth, every drop of water drawn from a fountain, every bath that steamed in the afternoon light, was made possible by those distant arches carrying water silently into the city. Imagine, for a moment, standing at the base of one of these great stone structures. The arches rise above you, each one repeating the same graceful curve, carrying a channel hidden at the very top. There is no sound of rushing water, only the knowledge that above your head the flow continues, steady and sure, as it has for years. The aqueduct is both silent and alive, a bridge not of people but of water. In the countryside, the aqueducts also brought change. Villages near their paths sometimes had access to cleaner water than before. Fields could be irrigated, animals refreshed, and households supported. The reach of Rome's water extended beyond the walls of the city, quietly shaping the life of the land around it, and through it all, the aqueducts stood as guardians of the city's most precious gift. They were not temples or palaces, but in their own way, they were more important. For without water, Rome could not have been Rome. The arches still stand today. Some weathered, some broken, but all whispering the same truth, that water, guided with care, can sustain a civilization. Some aqueducts stretched for astonishing distances, weaving across the landscape like ribbons of stone. One of the longest, the Aqua Marcia, carried water for more than 90 kilometers before reaching Rome. It is remarkable to think of such a structure, built without modern machinery, yet lasting for centuries. Step by step, stone by stone, it grew into something both practical and enduring. The design of the aqueducts was simple in principle, but complex in execution. Water moved only by gravity, guided by a slight slope that remained almost invisible to the eye. The Romans measured and calculated with incredible precision, ensuring that the flow never faltered. In this, they showed not only skill, but patience, the kind of patience that shapes stone into lasting form. Along their routes, aqueducts included bridges, tunnels, and siphons. Each obstacle in the landscape required a different solution, and the builders adapted with creativity. Where hills blocked the way, tunnels were dug. Where valleys opened, arches were raised. In this way, the aqueducts were not rigid, but flexible, adjusting themselves to the land they crossed. At the heart of these systems were the settling tanks and distribution points. Here, the water paused, allowing impurities to sink before being guided onward. From these hubs, channels branched out, sending water into the heart of the city. It was a network, alive with movement, carefully designed so that each part supported the whole. Some aqueducts even supplied water to decorative features, cascades, pools, and fountains that offered not just function, but beauty. The sight of water glistening in sunlight, spilling gently into carved basins, must have been soothing to those who passed by. In these quiet details, the engineering became more than practical. It became part of the city's character. Though the aqueducts served Rome, they also demanded constant care. Stone cracked, mortar loosened, and channels needed cleaning. Workers inspected them, climbing the arches, walking along their length, and repairing what time had worn. The system was alive, but fragile, always needing attention to remain steady. In times of conflict, aqueducts became targets. Enemies who sought to weaken Rome sometimes damaged the channels, knowing that without water, the city would struggle. Yet the Romans rebuilt, stone upon stone, refusing to let the flow be broken for long. The persistence of water, carried over miles, reflected the persistence of the people themselves. As the centuries passed, some aqueducts fell silent. Without maintenance, they crumbled, their channels empty. Others, however, endured, still carrying water long after the empire began to fade. Even today, in some places, fragments of aqueducts remain in use, proof of their enduring design. Standing before these ruins now, one feels a quiet sense of continuity. The arches may be broken, but the idea behind them still flows through modern cities. The thought that water can be guided, shared, and preserved began here, in these channels of stone. The aqueducts remind us that civilizations are built not only on armies or monuments, but on the steady presence of water. Their arches stand as a quiet testament to the importance of sustaining daily life. And though the water has long since stopped flowing through many of them, their story continues, like a gentle echo, carried across the centuries. As the aqueducts carried water into Rome, their flow did not end in silence. Instead, the streams spilled into fountains scattered across the city, each one a small gift to the neighborhoods it served. Imagine walking along narrow streets, hearing the soft splash of water filling stone basins, a sound as constant as birdsong or the hum of voices in the market. These fountains were not luxuries, but lifelines, sustaining thousands of people each day. The public fountains were simple in design, yet elegant in purpose. Water poured steadily through carved spouts, often in the shape of animal heads or plain stone mouths, into wide basins below. People arrived with clay jars, wooden buckets, or leather bags, waiting patiently for their turn to collect what they needed. The scene was ordinary, but it was also profound. For in those moments, water became not only a resource, but a point of connection. In crowded neighborhoods, fountains acted as meeting places. Neighbors greeted each other, exchanging news as they filled their vessels. Children played nearby, dipping their hands in the cool flow. Travelers stopped to refresh themselves before continuing their journeys. Each fountain was more than stone and water. It was a small center of community life, humming quietly with activity. The fountains also carried a sense of equality. While private homes of the wealthy sometimes had water delivered directly, most Romans relied on these shared spaces. Rich or poor, they came to the same basins, touched the same flow, and heard the same steady trickle. In this way, water united people across social boundaries, reminding them that life's most essential gift was shared. The supply of water was constant, flowing day and night. Unlike wells that could dry or rivers that could flood, the aqueducts provided a steady rhythm. At dawn, early risers filled their jars before the day's labor. At midday, the heat of the sun drew people to the fountains for relief. In the evening, the sound of water mingled with quiet voices as the city settled into rest. Some fountains were decorated with stone carvings, while others remained plain. Yet no matter how simple, they carried a quiet beauty. The sight of clear water glistening against stone, the gentle ripples catching light, gave a sense of calm to those who passed. It was as if the city itself was breathing, its lifeblood moving in plain sight. These fountains also served as markers in the city. People gave directions by them, arranged meetings beside them, and recognized their neighborhoods through their presence. In a place as vast as Rome, they were points of familiarity, always flowing, always present. To lose a fountain would have been to lose more than water. It would have been to lose part of the city's rhythm. For children, the fountains were often places of wonder. The steady flow of water seemed magical, unending, never tiring. They splashed, played, and marveled at how the basins never emptied. Though they may not have understood the aqueducts above, they felt the joy of cool water in their hands, a memory that must have stayed with them long into adulthood. In times of scarcity elsewhere, the fountains reminded Romans of their fortune. While other towns might struggle with wells or cisterns, Rome enjoyed a flow so steady that it seemed eternal. It was not eternal. Of course, it required constant labor and care, but to those who filled their jars each day, the water felt like a certainty, something they could depend on without question. Thus, the public fountains became more than functional. They were woven into the daily lives of Romans, shaping not only how people lived, but also how they gathered, rested, and remembered. In their steady trickle, the fountains spoke a quiet truth, that the simplest gifts, shared among many, can sustain a city far longer than grand monuments ever could. The fountains also helped keep the city cleaner. By providing easy access to running water, they allowed people to wash their hands, rinse fruits and vegetables, and carry fresh water back to their homes. This daily habit, simple as it seems, gave the city a rhythm of health, reducing the risks of stagnant pools or unclean sources. In larger squares, fountains often grew more elaborate. Some were fed by multiple aqueducts, producing flows that seemed endless. These great fountains became part of the city's landscape, places where one could pause and watch the water dance in the sunlight. They brought beauty to spaces that might otherwise have been only stone and dust. Even modest fountains carried a certain elegance. Their designs were practical, yet there was something calming in their steady trickle. The water itself seemed to offer comfort to those who stopped to listen, like a soft whisper in the background of daily life. In this way, fountains became not just a necessity, but also a quiet form of relief for the senses. The availability of water shaped how people experienced the city. Markets relied on it to clean produce and refresh buyers. Craftsmen needed it for their work, whether dyeing fabrics or shaping clay. Families, no matter how humble, could depend on it for cooking and washing. The fountains, though ordinary, touched nearly every aspect of Roman life. Travelers and visitors also came to depend on these fountains. For those arriving from faraway towns, the sight of fresh water in abundance must have been striking. It showed not only Rome's wealth of resources, but also its organization. The careful planning that allowed such a gift to be freely available to anyone who entered the city. The fountains served as reminders of the larger systems that fed them. Most people never saw the aqueducts that stretched across the hills, but they knew the water that reached their jars each day. In a way, the fountains translated Rome's distant engineering into something immediate and personal, a connection between the grand and the ordinary. Even during times of difficulty, when supplies elsewhere might falter, the fountains still flowed. Their constant presence gave reassurance, reminding people that the city was steady. This trust in the fountains allowed Romans to face the challenges of crowded life with a sense of calm. The sound of water at night added to the atmosphere of the city. As the markets closed and the streets quieted, the trickling continued, steady and soft. For those who passed on late errands or returned home after long days, the fountains greeted them with the same calm rhythm as in the morning. Generations grew up knowing the fountains as part of their landscape. Parents taught children where to fetch water, how to carry it safely, and how to share the space with neighbors. In this way, the fountains were not just physical structures, but teachers, shaping habits of patience, sharing, and care for daily needs. In the end, the fountains remind us that the strength of Rome did not rest only in its grand monuments or mighty armies. It rested, too, in the steady flow of water, available to all, sustaining the ordinary rhythms of life. The fountains, humble as they were, became symbols of continuity, quietly nourishing the city and leaving behind echoes that we can still imagine today. When we think of plumbing today, we often imagine the simple act of turning a tap and seeing water flow instantly into our homes. But in ancient Rome, this convenience was far from ordinary. While aqueducts and fountains served the entire city, the question remains: did individual Roman households truly have water flowing directly inside? For most families, the answer was no. The majority of Romans, especially those living in apartment-style buildings known as insulae, relied on public fountains and wells. Each day, water had to be fetched and carried upstairs, sometimes several flights, in heavy jars. This routine shaped the daily rhythm of ordinary life, where access to water depended not on pipes, but on steady effort. Yet, for the wealthy, the story was different. Some private homes, especially villas and houses belonging to the elite, did enjoy plumbing. Pipes made of clay, stone, or even lead connected their properties to the larger aqueduct system. In these homes, water could flow into courtyards, small fountains, and basins, creating an atmosphere of calm and luxury that ordinary families could only imagine. Imagine walking through the shaded garden of a Roman villa. In the center, a fountain splashes gently into a carved pool. The sound cools the air, the ripples catch the light, and the presence of water turns the space into a retreat from the busy world outside. For the wealthy, this was not only comfort, it was a statement of status. Private plumbing also allowed for small bathing areas within certain homes. These were not as grand as the famous public baths, but they offered privacy and convenience. Heated water could be supplied through underground systems, turning a private room into a miniature sanctuary of relaxation. It was, in many ways, an early glimpse of what we now consider modern comfort. Still, such luxuries were rare. Only a fraction of Rome's population experienced them. The vast majority of citizens continued to gather at fountains, carrying their water through crowded streets. The contrast between these two ways of life, public and private, shared and exclusive, reveals much about Roman society. The pipes that supplied private homes were often expensive to install and maintain. They also depended heavily on the aqueducts themselves. If the larger system failed or slowed, even the grandest villa might fall silent, its fountains dry, its baths empty. In this sense, the wealthy were not entirely independent, but tied to the same flow that sustained the city at large. There were also concerns with materials. Pipes made from lead, though widely used, were not without risk. Over time, people noticed that water could taste different when flowing through them, yet clay pipes, though safer, were more fragile. In either case, the maintenance of plumbing was an ongoing task, one that required resources not available to most. For ordinary Romans, the lack of plumbing at home did not mean life was without comfort. The fountains themselves were steady, reliable, and woven into the social fabric of the city. Families may not have had private streams in their courtyards, but they had access to water in ways that many ancient civilizations could only envy. So while some Romans could boast of water flowing into their homes, the truth is that most experienced plumbing as a public gift rather than a private one. The system was vast, but its benefits were uneven, reflecting the balance of wealth and community that defined so much of Roman life. In some villas, the presence of water was carefully designed to impress. Guests arriving might be greeted by courtyards where fountains whispered softly, a sign that the household was connected to Rome's mighty aqueducts. The sight alone suggested wealth, not only in coins, but in access to the city's most valuable resource. Inside basins and channels directed water into kitchens, gardens, and even ornamental pools. The sound of flowing water gave these spaces a sense of life, cooling the air and easing the mind. To walk through such a house was to experience comfort that felt unusual in the ancient world, where most people still relied on carrying water by hand. Heating systems sometimes complemented these private supplies. With clever use of underground channels, water could be warmed before reaching small bath chambers. These private baths, though modest compared to Rome's great thermae, offered a level of luxury that blurred the line between public innovation and private indulgence. Still, the limits of Roman plumbing were clear. Only those with great means could afford such designs, and even then, the flow was never guaranteed. Repairs were frequent, and the reliance on distant aqueducts meant that a single break could leave an entire villa without water. The beauty of private fountains came with the constant reminder of maintenance. For most Romans, the idea of water flowing inside the home remained little more than imagination. The insulae, where the majority lived, were crowded and basic. These tall apartment blocks rarely had even the most modest plumbing. Residents climbed stairs carrying jars filled at the nearest fountain, a task repeated each day, generation after generation. This division between those with water at their fingertips and those who labored for every drop reveals much about Roman society. Plumbing was not only a matter of convenience, but of privilege. To have it was to stand apart, marked by resources and status. To live without it was to share in the common struggle that bound the majority together. Yet even with such differences, the city remained connected through the larger system. Whether the water flowed into courtyards or public fountains, it came from the same aqueducts, the same channels built stone by stone across the land. In this sense, every household, rich or poor, depended on the same flow. The presence of private plumbing also showed the ambition of Rome. It was not enough for water to serve the public alone. The Romans experimented with bringing it into the most personal spaces of daily life. Though rare, these attempts revealed a vision of comfort that pointed forward to what we now take for granted. At the same time, the balance of water use highlighted Rome's priorities. The great baths and public fountains received much of the supply, ensuring that many benefited, even if not all enjoyed private access. This choice reflected a city that valued communal life, even while leaving room for individual luxury. And so, when we ask whether Romans truly had plumbing in their homes, the answer is both yes and no. Yes, some enjoyed it, with fountains, baths, and channels built into their villas. But for the majority, plumbing remained public, shared, and part of the city's collective heartbeat. The story of Roman water reminds us that even in the ancient world, comfort was uneven, yet community was always sustained. The Roman baths were among the most impressive showcases of their plumbing systems. These vast complexes were more than simple places to wash. They were centers of daily life, woven into the rhythm of the city like marketplaces or forums. To step into a bathhouse was to enter a world where water shaped not only cleanliness, but also comfort, leisure, and community. Imagine the sound as you walked inside. The echo of footsteps across marble floors, the soft splash of water flowing into pools, the low hum of conversations rising and fading. The baths were never silent, but their noise was gentle, layered with the soothing presence of water. For many Romans, this was a place of familiarity, a space they visited regularly, almost as part of a routine. The baths relied on a careful balance of engineering. Water flowed in from aqueducts, filling cisterns that supplied the pools. Furnaces heated air that circulated beneath floors, warming rooms and keeping the water at just the right temperature. Pipes directed the flow, ensuring that the complex could offer both steaming hot baths and refreshing cold plunges. Each bathhouse contained several different rooms, each serving a unique purpose. The caldarium was hot and steamy, filled with warmth that penetrated tired muscles. The frigidarium offered a cool plunge, sharp and bracing. Between them lay the tepidarium, a gentle middle ground where the body could adjust. Moving through these rooms was like following a ritual of balance, each step easing the mind as well as the body. Though the wealthy had the means to build small private baths, the great public complexes were open to ordinary citizens. For a modest fee, anyone could enjoy the same luxuries of heated floors, flowing water, and restful spaces. In this sense, the baths served not only as places of comfort, but also as symbols of community life, shared by people of many backgrounds. The baths were often grand in scale. Some stretched across vast courtyards, adorned with mosaics and columns, gardens and libraries. They were not only practical, but also architectural wonders, designed to impress both locals and visitors. Their very size spoke of Rome's ambition to make water serve not only function, but also beauty and grandeur. Yet beneath their elegance lay a constant need for maintenance. Furnaces had to be stoked, pipes repaired, and pools cleaned. Workers moved behind the scenes, unseen by most visitors, keeping the system alive. Without their steady effort, the baths would have fallen silent, their waters cooling, their rooms empty. For many, the baths were also places of recovery. After long days of labor, the warmth soothed tired bodies, while the steady rhythm of water calmed restless minds. Families, friends, and neighbors all gathered there, their conversations flowing as easily as the water itself. In this way, the baths were not only physical spaces, but emotional refuges. The baths also reflected Rome's ability to organize resources. Heating water, circulating air, and keeping the flows steady required planning on a massive scale. Behind the calm pools and quiet steam was a network of cisterns, channels, and workers, all cooperating to make the experience possible. It was engineering hidden beneath tranquility. And while today we may view baths simply as leisure, in Rome they carried deeper meaning. They were places of connection, health, and rest, blending the practical with the social. To step into a Roman bath was not only to wash, but to participate in a rhythm that belonged to the city itself, a rhythm sustained by water and shared by all. The largest of Rome's bathhouses, such as the baths of Caracalla or Diocletian, could host thousands of visitors each day. These complexes were like miniature cities within the city, filled with gardens, libraries, exercise areas, and halls for gatherings. The sound of water echoed through vast chambers, its presence reminding all who entered that Rome's engineering was both powerful and constant. Walking through such a bathhouse must have felt like a journey in itself. From the heat of the caldarium to the cool stillness of the frigidarium, the body was carried gently through changing sensations. Each room prepared the visitor for the next, and in the end, one left not only cleaner, but renewed. The water shaped both body and spirit, easing the weight of daily life. The baths also encouraged balance in daily routines. After time in the heated rooms, one might move to a courtyard, resting in shaded gardens where fountains trickled softly. The shift from warmth to coolness, from indoor chambers to open air, mirrored the natural cycles of day and night, work and rest. For children, the baths offered moments of wonder. The sheer scale of the halls, the gleam of mosaics, and the endless presence of water must have left deep impressions. They learned early that their city valued not only strength in its monuments, but also comfort in its gathering places. The baths became part of memory, woven into the story of growing up in Rome. Even visitors from distant lands marveled at the sight. For those accustomed to simpler towns, the abundance of water in Rome seemed extraordinary. To walk into halls where heated pools and cool plunges stood side by side was to witness a society that had harnessed water in ways few could imagine. The baths were not only for Romans, but also a message to the world. Here, life was shaped by abundance, yet, behind the grandeur, the baths were still dependent on ordinary systems. Aqueducts supplied the flow, furnaces burned constantly, and workers toiled unseen. Without these humble efforts, the baths would have been nothing more than empty shells of stone. The elegance that visitors admired was built upon steady, quiet labor. The baths also remind us of the fragility of such systems. When aqueducts fell into disrepair or when supplies faltered, the pools grew quiet. The vast halls emptied, their echoes replaced by silence. Over time, some bathhouses crumbled, their mosaics broken, their chambers filled with dust. The rhythm of water was not eternal. It relied on constant care. Even so, the ruins of Roman baths still speak softly today. Their arches rise above fields, their walls still standing against time. Though the water has long ceased to flow, one can almost hear the echo of footsteps, the murmur of voices, and the gentle splash of fountains that once filled their halls. In these ruins, we see not only what Rome built, but also what it valued. The baths were investments in comfort, in health, and in shared experience. They remind us that civilizations endure not only through conquest, but also through the quiet care of daily life. And so, the Roman baths remain part of the story of water, an extension of the aqueducts and fountains, and a reflection of how plumbing shaped an entire way of life. They are proof that water, when guided with vision, can create spaces that are both practical and peaceful, sustaining communities across centuries. When we speak of Roman plumbing, it is impossible to overlook their attention to sanitation. Though the systems were simple compared to our modern standards, they represented one of the earliest large-scale attempts to manage waste in a crowded city. Rome understood that water was not only for drinking and bathing, but also for carrying away what was unwanted. The most famous part of this system was the Cloaca Maxima, or Great Sewer, built centuries before the height of the empire. It grew into a vast underground channel that directed water and waste out of the city. Imagine the dark stone tunnels, carrying a steady current beneath the streets above. It was silent, hidden, yet essential, keeping Rome livable for its growing population. Public latrines were another feature of Roman sanitation. These were long stone benches, with holes carved side by side, often without dividers. Beneath them, water flowed constantly, carrying waste away into larger channels. To us, this might feel strange, even uncomfortable, but to the Romans, it was a practical solution that worked for many years. These latrines were often located near baths or busy gathering places. In this way, they served not just the wealthy, but also the ordinary citizens who relied on shared facilities. Access to flowing water meant that waste could be managed more effectively than in many other ancient societies. The Romans did not achieve perfection, but they achieved improvement, and that distinction mattered. The flow of water beneath these latrines came from aqueducts, or smaller channels, designed to keep the system in motion. Without the movement of water, the latrines would have quickly become unusable. This constant circulation shows again how central water was to every part of Roman life, not only for comfort, but for cleanliness. Still, sanitation was far from equal. In poorer neighborhoods, where people lived in crowded insulae, waste was often thrown into streets or collected in pits that had to be emptied. The great sewers served parts of the city, but not all. Many families still lived with conditions that were far from healthy. Plumbing, though advanced, could not reach everyone, Even so, Rome's attempts to manage sanitation set it apart. Many ancient towns had no organized systems at all, leaving waste to accumulate dangerously. Rome, with its channels and drains, showed an early awareness that health depended not only on access to water, but also on the removal of what polluted it. The Cloaca Maxima itself became a symbol of endurance. Though parts of it have changed over time, sections of the sewer still exist today, reminding us of how long such systems can last when built with care. It is remarkable to think that a structure designed more than 2,000 years ago could still whisper of its purpose beneath the earth. For ordinary Romans, sanitation shaped daily habits. Some used public latrines, others carried waste away in containers, and many relied on the quiet work of water flowing unseen beneath their streets. The systems were imperfect, yet they made a difference, helping the city sustain its vast numbers. Thus, Roman sanitation reflects both the strengths and the limits of ancient plumbing. It reveals a society that tried to manage its challenges with the tools it had, succeeding in some places, falling short in others. And in that balance, we see not only the achievements of Rome, but also the humanity of its people, navigating daily life much as we do now. In wealthier households, some private latrines existed, though they were far less common than the public ones. These small chambers were usually simple, with water channels carrying waste away into larger drains. They served as conveniences for families who could afford them, yet even here, the design was modest compared to the elaborate baths or fountains that graced their villas. The presence of these private latrines highlights once again the divide between rich and poor in Roman society. For the elite, sanitation could be managed within the walls of their homes. For the majority, however, it remained a public matter, shared with neighbors, strangers, and passers-by in open facilities. Despite their simplicity, Roman latrines reveal a society that understood the importance of moving waste out of living spaces. The constant flow of water, guided by aqueducts and drains, was an early step toward the sanitation systems that would appear much later in history. It was not perfect, but it was progress. The design of these latrines also reflected Rome's communal spirit. Sitting side by side, people used them without privacy, talking, exchanging news, or simply passing the time. What we might find unusual was, to them, a normal part of life, shaped by practicality rather than modesty. For children growing up in Rome, these facilities were simply part of the city's environment. They learned early that water did not only serve fountains and baths, but also carried away what was unwanted. This lesson, simple yet profound, showed how central plumbing was to every stage of life in the city. The maintenance of sanitation required constant labor. Workers cleaned channels, repaired drains, and ensured that the flow did not stop. Their work was often unseen and uncelebrated, yet without it, Rome could not have functioned. The quiet effort of these individuals kept the city's heartbeat steady. When problems arose, blocked channels, overflowing waste, or broken drains, life quickly became uncomfortable. These moments reminded Romans that their systems were fragile, dependent on care and repair. The very presence of sanitation was a comfort, but its absence was deeply felt. Over time, as the empire declined, many of these systems fell into disrepair. Without regular upkeep, drains clogged, sewers collapsed, and the flow of water slowed. The great achievements of sanitation, once a mark of Rome's strength, faded into silence, leaving behind only fragments of stone. And yet, the memory of Rome's sanitation endured. Later civilizations studied their sewers and drains, learning from their successes and their failures. The Cloaca Maxima remained a reminder that even in ancient times, people sought to live in cleaner, healthier ways. In the end, Roman toilets and sanitation tell a story not of perfection, but of persistence. The people of Rome, like all people, faced the challenge of living together in crowded spaces. With the tools they had, they built systems that carried water and waste alike, shaping a city that endured for centuries. Their efforts, humble yet remarkable, still whisper to us through the ruins today. For all their achievements, Roman plumbing was not without limits. The systems we admire today were impressive for their time, yet they reached only a portion of the population. To imagine Rome as a city where every household enjoyed running water would be misleading. In truth, plumbing was uneven, often a privilege rather than a universal reality. Most families lived in insulate crowded apartment blocks that rose several stories high. These buildings rarely had plumbing of their own. Water had to be fetched from fountains and carried up narrow stairways, jar by jar. Waste was often thrown into pits, containers, or even the streets below. Life in these insulae was a far cry from the villas with their private fountains and baths. The weight of water itself posed a problem. Carrying heavy jars up multiple flights of stairs was daily labor, sometimes repeated several times. For the elderly, children, or those already burdened by long hours of work, this effort was exhausting. Yet it was part of survival, and it bound households together in shared routines. Even the aqueducts, as grand as they were, had weaknesses. They depended on careful maintenance, and without it, the flow of water could falter. Sediment collected, stones cracked, and channels leaked. Repairs required resources, workers, and constant oversight. Rome's systems were strong, but they were also fragile, balanced on the steady effort of many hands. The reliance on lead pipes in some areas also created challenges. While lead was durable and easy to shape, its long-term effects on health were poorly understood. Some ancient observers even noted that water drawn from such pipes tasted different. Though clay and stone were alternatives, they lacked the same resilience, forcing builders to choose between practicality and purity. The public baths and fountains, though plentiful, could not erase inequalities. Crowds often gathered at the fountains, waiting their turn to fill jars. In summer, the demand grew even heavier. Those with private access to water enjoyed relief, while others endured the heat in long lines. The difference between public and private plumbing was not only physical, but also social. Sanitation, too, had its limits. The Cloaca Maxima and other sewers managed parts of the city, but not all. In poorer districts, waste disposal remained basic and unsanitary. Diseases could still spread, fueled by close quarters and imperfect systems. Plumbing had advanced, but it had not eliminated the challenges of crowded urban life. Even the grandeur of the baths carried burdens. Furnaces consumed vast amounts of fuel, workers labored constantly, and water had to be diverted in great quantities. The luxury of steam and warmth came at a cost, one that smaller towns and villages could rarely match. Rome's plumbing was impressive, but it was also demanding. For those outside the capital, access was far more limited. Smaller settlements might have a single aqueduct or none at all, relying instead on wells, rivers, or cisterns. The marvels of plumbing were concentrated in Rome and a few major cities, leaving much of the empire without such luxuries. And so, while the achievements of Roman plumbing deserve admiration, they must also be seen in balance. They were not universal, not perfect, and not eternal. The systems served many, but not all. Their presence gave comfort, but their absence reminded Romans of how fragile life could be without water's steady flow. Another limit was the cost of maintaining such vast systems. Building aqueducts and baths was only the beginning. They required constant cleaning, inspection, and repair. Cracks appeared in arches, pipes leaked, and drains clogged with debris. Without the steady labor of workers, the flow of water would have slowed, and the city would have suffered. In times of political unrest or war, these vulnerabilities became clear. Invading armies sometimes cut off aqueducts, knowing that without water, Rome's strength would falter. Even natural disasters, like earthquakes or floods, could damage the delicate balance of channels and drains, leaving parts of the city dry. The concentration of plumbing in certain areas also meant that not all neighborhoods were served equally. Wealthier districts often had better access, while poorer areas relied on fewer fountains and less reliable systems. This uneven distribution shaped the daily experiences of people across the city, reinforcing the gap between rich and poor. Seasonal changes added further strain. In hot summers, the demand for water grew heavy, testing the limits of supply. In winter, cold weather could slow repairs or damage channels. Rome's plumbing, though advanced, still bowed to the forces of nature, reminding its people that they depended on more than stone and mortar. Even the design of public latrines, practical as it was, left room for discomfort. The lack of privacy and the communal setting could feel awkward, especially for those unaccustomed to such openness. Yet necessity outweighed modesty, and people continued to use them. Proof that daily needs often set aside personal preference. The presence of plumbing also came with environmental costs. Diverting rivers and springs changed the landscapes they touched. Fields, villages, and smaller towns sometimes lost access to water when aqueducts redirected flows toward Rome. The capital thrived, but often at the expense of surrounding areas. Over time, as the empire weakened, these weaknesses deepened. Without the resources to maintain them, aqueducts broke, sewers filled, and baths closed. The city that had once been defined by flowing water grew quieter, its fountains silent, its pools dry. Plumbing had always been powerful, but never invincible. What survived were fragments arches standing against the sky, channels carved into hillsides, drains hidden beneath ruins. These remains tell us as much about the limits of Rome as about its successes. They remind us that even the greatest systems depend on care, and without it, they fade. And yet, the very fact that ruins still stand shows the durability of what Rome achieved. Though the water no longer flows as it once did, the stonework endures, whispering of a time when entire cities were shaped by the flow of water through arches and pipes. So the limits of Roman plumbing teach us two lessons: that great achievements can still be fragile, and that even imperfect systems can shape the lives of millions. The story of Roman water is not one of perfection, but of persistence, a reminder that progress is always bound by effort, care, and the passage of time. When the Roman Empire finally began to fade, much of its plumbing and water systems fell silent. Aqueducts cracked, baths closed, and fountains dried. Yet, even in decline, the memory of flowing water remained, carried forward by the ruins that still stood in fields and cities. These remains became quiet teachers, showing later generations what had once been possible. The aqueducts, in particular, captured the imagination of those who saw them. Tall arches, stretching across valleys, looked timeless, as though they had been built by hands stronger than human. Even broken, they stood with dignity. reminding travelers that water had once flowed above their heads, guided only by gravity and stone. For centuries after Rome's fall, many towns across Europe struggled without such systems. Wells, rivers, and cisterns became the primary sources once again. Yet those who walked past the ruins of aqueducts must have wondered what it would take to bring such marvels back to life. The ruins carried not only silence, but inspiration. Medieval builders studied the remains, learning how Romans had managed slopes, arches, and channels. Though few had the resources to replicate them fully, the lessons endured. The idea that water could be guided, stored, and shared did not vanish with the empire. It lived on in the minds of those who dreamed of better cities. By the time of the Renaissance, interest in Roman engineering grew stronger. Scholars and architects looked closely at ancient ruins, sketching them, measuring them, and imagining how they had worked. The baths and aqueducts, once forgotten, became sources of knowledge again. In their weathered stones, people found not only history, but guidance. The influence of Roman water systems extended far beyond Europe. As explorers and settlers carried knowledge across the world, they also carried ideas rooted in Roman design. The concept of public fountains, central drains, and even underground sewers found echoes in many cities centuries later. Modern plumbing, though built with different tools and materials, owes part of its design to these ancient systems. The idea that water can be both a public good and a private comfort traces back to Rome. Every facet, every drain, and every sewer carries a quiet thread of connection to aqueducts and fountains that first served a city long ago. The legacy also lies in the reminder that water must be cared for. Rome's systems endured only with constant maintenance, and their decline showed what happens when care is lost. Today, cities face similar truths. Water is precious, and its flow cannot be taken for granted. In this way, the lessons of Rome still echo, as relevant as ever. For ordinary people, the legacy may not be measured in stone arches or ancient drains, but in the idea that water can and should be shared. The Romans understood that fountains, open to all, made a city stronger. That principle, though expressed differently today, continues to shape our sense of community and responsibility. So the ruins of Roman plumbing are more than relics. They are reminders of ambition, of creativity, and of effort. They show us that even imperfect systems can leave lasting marks on history. And they whisper quietly that progress, however fragile, can ripple through centuries, carried forward like water itself. The endurance of Rome's water systems also reveals the power of simple ideas executed with care. Gravity, stone, and steady flow were not complicated in themselves. Yet, when combined with patience and vision, they created wonders that outlived empires. The ruins we see today are not only architecture, they are testaments to human persistence. In some places, aqueducts continued to function long after Rome's decline. Local communities maintained sections, patching leaks, replacing stones, and keeping the water flowing. These quiet acts of preservation carried Rome's knowledge forward, keeping its influence alive, not through books or speeches, but through running streams. Even when broken, the remains of aqueducts became part of new landscapes. Farmers built fields around them, shepherds led animals beneath their arches, and travelers sought shelter in their shadows. The aqueducts may have fallen silent, but they were never useless. Their stone presence continued to shape the lives of those who lived near them. The baths, too, left their mark, though in different ways. Many crumbled into ruins, their pools filled with dust, yet their design inspired later architects. The idea of shared public spaces, devoted to rest, health, and gathering, carried forward into new cultures. Even modern spas and public bathhouses owe something to the vision first explored in Rome. Sewers and drains, less visible, also left a legacy. The principle of guiding waste away from living spaces shaped how later cities were planned. Clean water and proper disposal became recognized as foundations of health. Lessons learned in part from the successes and failures of Rome. Travelers and writers who visited the ruins centuries later often marveled at them. Some described the arches with wonder, others measured the precision of their slopes, and still others simply stood in silence. Their words remind us that Rome's water systems were not forgotten, but remained part of a living conversation between past and present. The quiet power of these ruins lies not only in their size, but in their message. They remind us that civilizations endure not through noise and conquest, but through the steady rhythms of daily life: water to drink, baths to rest, fountains to gather. These were the true foundations of Rome's longevity. For those who walk among the ruins today, the experience is often calming. To trace a hand along weathered stone, to look up at arches still standing against the sky, is to feel time soften. The silence speaks not of loss, but of continuity. It whispers that what was once built with care can still inspire, even across centuries. The legacy of Roman water systems is not a story of perfection, but of influence. They show us how ideas can survive long after structures crumble, how principles of balance, flow, and access remain useful even as tools and materials change. Their lessons are not trapped in stone. They flow forward, like water itself. And so, when we reflect on Rome's aqueducts, baths, fountains, and drains, we see more than ancient ruins. We see the quiet endurance of knowledge passed through time. We see the truth that water, guided with wisdom and care, can sustain not only cities, but civilizations. The Romans may have left their world behind, but their water still flows in ours, carried invisibly in the systems we rely on every day. As we come to the end of our journey tonight, let us pause for a moment and return to the streets of ancient Rome. The sound of water, flowing steadily from aqueducts, fountains, and baths, was once the quiet background of a city alive with people. That sound has faded now, but its memory remains, carried in the stones that still stand. Water in Rome was never only water. It was a lifeline, a comfort, and a reminder of how people depend on one another. It moved through public fountains, where neighbors gathered, and through vast baths, where voices echoed under stone arches. It shaped daily life, offering relief, rhythm, and connection. We often imagine history as grand battles and great rulers, but here we have seen something different. Rome's strength lay not only in its power, but in its ability to guide water, to share it, and to make it part of the ordinary days of its people. That is where its story feels most human. For the wealthy, private fountains and baths brought moments of luxury. For the majority, public fountains and shared latrines shaped the rhythm of life. And though these experiences were unequal, they were tied together by the same flow. The same aqueducts carrying water across the hills and valleys. Even the limits of Roman plumbing remind us of something important, that progress is always fragile. Systems require care, effort, and attention. Without them, even the most remarkable achievements can fade. In this, Rome's story is as much a lesson as it is an inspiration. The ruins of aqueducts, standing high against the sky, speak quietly of endurance. Though the water no longer flows, the arches remain, whispering across centuries that what is built with vision and patience can last long after its makers are gone. In the calm of evening, it is easy to imagine those ancient streets once again. The murmur of voices, the flicker of lamplight, the trickle of fountains in the dark, all part of a world that feels distant yet strangely familiar. The people of Rome lived with challenges and comforts, much like we do today. Water connected them. It gave rest after labor, refreshment in heat, and cleanliness in crowded spaces. It made life in a vast city not only possible, but bearable. In this way, water was the quiet companion of every Roman, flowing through their days like a gentle thread. As we reflect tonight, the story of Roman plumbing reminds us that history is not always about noise and grandeur. Sometimes it is about silence, about the steady rhythm of water flowing unseen beneath the surface. These quiet achievements are what allow civilizations to endure, and so, as you rest now, let the memory of Roman water guide your thoughts. Imagine the sound of a fountain in the distance, calm and unending, carrying you gently toward sleep. The Romans never knew how lasting their systems would be. To them, the aqueducts and baths were part of daily life, not monuments for the future. Yet their work carried forward, influencing generations, shaping cities, and reminding us of what careful planning can achieve. The beauty of their water systems lies not in perfection, but in persistence. They did not solve every problem, but they made life better, healthier, and more connected for millions of people. That truth is worth remembering. When you think of Rome now, perhaps you will not picture only its soldiers or emperors, but also its fountains and drains. Perhaps you will hear, in your imagination, the trickle of water echoing through stone courtyards, soothing the minds of those who lived long ago. The legacy of Roman plumbing is not just in ruins, but in the simple idea that water belongs to all, that it must be guided, shared, and protected. That idea, born centuries ago, continues to flow through our lives today. As you drift further into rest, let the story settle around you like a blanket. The arches of aqueducts rise in your mind, the baths shimmer with warm steam, and the fountains trickle softly in the quiet of evening. All of it a lullaby from history, gentle and steady. History for Sleep reminds us that even in the past, people sought comfort, rest, and stability. Their challenges were different, but their hopes were familiar. They wanted clean water, safe homes, and moments of peace, things that we, too, long for in our own time. Now, as your eyes grow heavy, think of those ancient fountains, still whispering in memory. Let their sound calm you, as it once calmed the people of Rome. Drift with it, slowly and gently, into dreams. Thank you for joining this quiet journey through the story of Roman plumbing. Your presence here is part of what makes these calm explorations meaningful, a reminder that history continues when it is shared. If you enjoyed this gentle tale, you may softly subscribe, so you will not miss the next story when it arrives. In our next journey, we will step into another world of the past and ask, what was life like in a Tudor castle? Together, we will wander through stone halls, quiet chambers, and the daily rhythms of a very different age. Until then, rest well and good night.